Case 1. Dr. Spencer Tepe was a 37-year-old dentist in Ohio. His wife, Monique Tepe, was 39. They lived together in a Columbus home with their two children, a 1-year-old boy and a 4-year-old girl. On December 30th, 2025, that home became the scene of one of the most disturbing double homicides Ohio recorded that year. The tragedy was discovered after a welfare check request. Early that morning, at approximately 9:30 a.m., a police officer was dispatched to check on the family. According to later reports, the officer initially went to the wrong address. About 40 minutes later, the police arrived at the correct home. When officers entered the residence, they found Spencer Tepe and Monique Tepe dead from gunshot wounds. Both were pronounced dead at the scene. Inside the same house, police located the couple's two young children. The children were alive and physically unharmed. They were removed from the home and placed into the care of family members. That detail immediately shaped public reaction. 2 adults had been killed, but the youngest members of the household had survived. Investigators made it clear early on that the children were not believed to be in danger. Authorities quickly classified the case as a double homicide. Police confirmed the date, the location, and the cause of death. They also confirmed that they were withholding certain details to protect the integrity of the investigation. One fact that stood out was the absence of publicly reported signs of forced entry. That information narrowed the focus of the case, but investigators stressed that it did not, by itself, answer who was responsible or why the shootings occurred. As the investigation progressed, detectives worked through a careful timeline. They reviewed when the family was last seen or heard from. They examined phone records, electronic data, and surveillance footage from the surrounding area. Officers canvassed the neighborhood and followed up on tips. Throughout this process, police emphasized restraint, releasing only information they could confirm without compromising future arrests. The story quickly drew attention across Columbus and beyond. Friends and neighbors struggled to reconcile the violence with what they believed was a normal family life. The home itself, once a private space, became a focal point for unanswered questions. For days, no suspect was publicly named. Police did not release a motive. Investigators acknowledged that they were examining personal connections, but stopped short of confirming any theory. Authorities specifically cautioned against speculation, noting that homicide investigations often involve multiple angles before conclusions are reached. In January 2026, the case reached a turning point. Police arrested Michael David McKee, identified in court documents as Monique Tepe's ex-husband. McKee was taken into custody outside Ohio and charged with 2 counts of murder. His arrest marked the first time prosecutors formally alleged responsibility for the deaths of Spencer and Monique Tepe. As of January 12, 2026, McKee was being held at the Winnebago County Jail in Illinois. He was awaiting an extradition hearing scheduled for that day, which would determine his transfer back to Ohio to face the charges. Court records confirmed that prosecutors were pursuing 2 murder counts, but did not publicly outline the evidence in detail, consistent with standard pretrial procedure. Investigators have not publicly confirmed a motive. While reports have noted a prior personal relationship and a 2017 divorce, authorities have been clear that no official motive has been announced. Detectives continue to review the history between the parties as part of the investigation, but police and prosecutors have avoided assigning intent or cause in public statements. That distinction remains important as the case moves through the legal system. With the arrest, the investigation entered a new phase. Law enforcement shifted from evidence gathering to case preparation. Prosecutors began organizing filings and court appearances. Defense counsel was expected to challenge the charges. Throughout this process, officials emphasized that the accused is presumed innocent unless proven guilty in court. The welfare check timeline also became a point of public attention. Reports confirming that an officer initially went to the wrong address raised questions about timing, response procedures, and whether anything could have changed the outcome. Authorities have not indicated that the delay altered the course of the case, but the clarification added another layer to an already complex investigation. As of mid-January 2026, the legal process was still unfolding. No trial had taken place. No verdict had been reached. Prosecutors continued preparing for court while extradition proceedings moved forward. Authorities maintained that additional details would be released only when appropriate. If you enjoy watching true crime videos, please support my channel by hitting the like button and subscribing. Thank you very much. Case 2. Martell Huggins. Ohio authorities connected him to one of the most disturbing homicide cases in the state in 2025. On November 25, 2025, Toledo police stopped a vehicle during what officers initially described as a routine traffic encounter. Within moments, the situation changed entirely. A search of the vehicle revealed multiple containers. Inside them were human remains. Investigators later confirmed those remains belonged to Malachi Calder, a 27-year-old man whose disappearance had already raised concern among family and friends. Huggins was taken into custody at the scene, and the stop immediately became a major homicide investigation. Malachi Calder's disappearance did not begin with the traffic stop. While a missing person report was formally filed on November 22, 2025, some police records indicate Calder had not been seen since November 15, 2025. That expanded timeline became a key focus for investigators. Detectives worked backward, reviewing Calder's last confirmed contacts, phone activity, and movements in the days before he vanished. Family members reported growing worry as days passed without communication. At that stage, there was no public indication of violence, only the uncertainty that often surrounds missing person cases. That uncertainty ended abruptly 3 days later when officers encountered Huggins driving Calder's vehicle. During the November 25th stop, officers identified the car as belonging to Calder. That discovery prompted a search that uncovered containers holding parts of Calder's body. Police secured the vehicle, documented the evidence, and contacted homicide investigators. The Lucas County Coroner's Office later ruled Calder's death a homicide. According to the coroner's findings and court records, Calder suffered multiple sharp force injuries, along with gunshot and stab wounds to the head. Authorities avoided releasing unnecessary detail, but they confirmed the injuries were consistent with an intentional killing. Some of Calder's remains were found inside the vehicle, while additional remains were later recovered from a separate location described by officials as an unauthorized burial site. Prosecutors moved quickly after the arrest. Martell Huggins was charged with aggravated murder, along with additional counts related to the treatment of Calder's body after death. Court records show Huggins entered a plea of not guilty. Investigators emphasized that their case would rely on physical evidence, forensic analysis, and documented timelines rather than speculation. Surveillance footage, vehicle data, and phone records were reviewed to establish where Calder was last alive and how his remains came to be transported in the car. Each step was aimed at narrowing the timeline between November 15th and November 25th, a critical 10-day window for the prosecution. As more details surfaced, authorities confirmed that Huggins and Calder knew each other. The exact nature of that relationship has not been fully disclosed, and prosecutors have declined to outline a motive at this stage. Investigators have stated only that the evidence supports a targeted killing rather than a random act. Community reaction in Toledo was swift and heavy. Residents expressed disbelief that a traffic stop could expose a crime of such magnitude. Local leaders urged restraint and respect for Calder's family, emphasizing that verified facts, not rumors, should guide public understanding of the case. Court records also revealed information about Huggins's background. Investigators confirmed that earlier in 2025, Huggins had been convicted of stalking a Toledo woman. He was serving probation for that offense at the time of Calder's death. Prosecutors have not stated how or if that prior conviction will factor into the murder case, but it has been included in court filings and pre-trial discussions. The revelation added another layer to the investigation, raising questions about supervision, compliance with probation terms, and Huggins's behavior in the months leading up to the homicide. By December 2025, a Lucas County grand jury returned an indictment, formally advancing the case toward trial. Huggins remained in custody as pre-trial motions moved forward. The court ordered a competency evaluation, a procedural step used to determine whether a defendant is able to understand the proceedings and assist in his defense. As of January 2026, Huggins remained jailed on a $2 million bond. A competency hearing was scheduled for January 16, 2026, setting the next major milestone in the case. Prosecutors indicated they were prepared to proceed once the evaluation process concluded. Case 3. Samuel Tyler Erickson was only 26 years old when a single afternoon in Cincinnati turned into one of Ohio's most devastating murder cases of 2025. On August 31, 2025, at approximately 1:30 p.m., police were dispatched to an apartment on Beacon Avenue in the Mount Washington neighborhood following reports of gunfire. By the end of that day, 3 young people were dead. Bemnit Derese, 27, Eden Adugna, 22, and Feven Adugna, 20. When officers entered the apartment, they found Eden Adugna and Feven Adugna suffering from fatal gunshot wounds. Both were pronounced dead at the scene, according to official police and medical examiner reports. A third victim, Bemnit Derese, was found critically injured but alive. Emergency responders transported him to a nearby medical center in an attempt to save his life. Despite treatment, Bemnit later died at the hospital, a detail confirmed in follow-up police press releases that corrected early assumptions about the timing of all 3 deaths. Investigators quickly identified Samuel Tyler Erickson as the suspect. Police confirmed that he had left the scene before officers arrived. Later that day, law enforcement located Erickson elsewhere in the Cincinnati area. During that encounter, authorities stated that Erickson shot himself. He was transported to a hospital but did not survive. Police made clear that no officers fired their weapons and no pursuit-related force was used against him. With Erickson's death, the criminal justice process ended before it could formally begin. Because the suspect was deceased, prosecutors confirmed that no charges would be filed, no indictment would be sought, and no trial would occur. The case was officially closed as a homicide-suicide under Ohio law. For the families of the victims, that meant there would be no courtroom testimony, no plea hearings, and no verdict, only investigative findings and public statements. As detectives reconstructed the events leading up to the shooting, earlier interactions with authorities became a critical part of the public record. In August 2025, weeks before the killings, Eden Adugna contacted emergency services expressing concern about Erickson's behavior and communications. That call resulted in Hamilton County deputies conducting a wellness check on Erickson. According to police records, deputies spoke directly with Erickson and involved a mental health crisis response team. During that interaction, Erickson told authorities he was not suicidal and not homicidal. Based on his statements, his presentation at the time, and Ohio law, responders determined that he did not meet the criteria for involuntary commitment. As a result, no weapons were seized and no charges were filed. This point became central to later public discussion. At the time of the wellness check, Ohio did not have a red flag law, also known as an extreme risk protection order. Such laws, in states where they exist, allow courts to temporarily remove firearms from individuals deemed to pose a serious risk. In Erickson's case, the absence of such a law meant authorities had no legal mechanism to confiscate his firearm based solely on concerns, especially after he denied any intent to harm himself or others. Police officials later stated that the response followed existing legal standards and protocol. Still, after the killings, the case became a reference point in statewide debates about firearm access, crisis intervention, and preventive legal tools. Lawmakers and advocacy groups cited the Erickson case as an example of the limitations authorities face when warning signs exist but do not meet statutory thresholds for action. Investigators addressed questions about motive with caution, Police acknowledged that Erickson may have had a romantic interest in one of the victims, but they did not release details suggesting a broader ideological or bias-based motive. Authorities confirmed the crime was not classified as a hate crime. No written explanation or recorded statement was found that clarified Erickson's intentions. As a result, the motive remains inferred rather than definitively established. The timing of the violence added to its impact. The shootings occurred in the middle of the day during a holiday weekend when many residents were nearby. News of the killings spread quickly through Cincinnati, prompting vigils and memorial gatherings. Friends, relatives, and community members described Bemnit Deresa, Eden Adugna, and Fivan Adugna as young adults with strong family ties and promising futures. Please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for your support. Case 4. Jacob Pritchard. A sequence of events in late October 2025 led investigators across 3 Ohio communities and left 3 people dead. What initially appeared to be a straightforward double homicide followed by suicide quickly became more complex as law enforcement agencies clarified what they could confirm and what they could not. By early 2026, officials had publicly acknowledged gaps in the timeline, emphasizing that the case involved 3 distinct crime scenes and several unresolved questions about movement, timing, and discovery. One of those crime scenes was in Huber Heights, Ohio, where Jacob Pritchard lived with his wife, Jamie Pritchard, who was 33 years old. Investigators identified the residence as a primary focus of the investigation and linked it to Jamie's death by strangulation. However, officials stopped short of definitively stating that the killing occurred inside the home. While the Huber Heights address remained central to the case, authorities made clear in later statements that the exact location and timing of Jamie Pritchard's death had not been conclusively established, even though the evidence tied her death to that address and to her husband. What investigators did confirm was that Jamie Pritchard's body was ultimately found in the trunk of Jacob Pritchard's vehicle. Early public assumptions suggested that her body had been in the trunk during the entire series of events that followed. That assumption was later corrected in statements released by the West Milton Police Department and echoed in follow-up reporting. Investigators said they were uncertain whether Jamie's body was in the car during the earlier phase of the incident, particularly at the time of the Sugar Creek Township killing. Authorities stated they were fairly certain that Jacob Pritchard did not have her body in the vehicle when he first traveled to his co-worker's home, raising the possibility that he returned to the Huber Heights area later or used a different vehicle before the final stage of the incident. The second confirmed crime scene was in Sugar Creek Township, where Jaime Gustitis, a 25-year-old first lieutenant in the United States Air Force, was killed. Gustitis lived alone and worked at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, as did both Jacob and Jamie Pritchard. Investigators determined that Gustitis died from a gunshot wound. Importantly, authorities confirmed that Gustitis called emergency services during the break-in. Police responded to the call but initially found no suspect and no victim at the scene. It was only later that Gustitis was discovered deceased inside the residence. That emergency call and the initial police response that did not immediately uncover the crime became a key detail in understanding how the case unfolded. It demonstrated that even as events were happening, first responders did not yet realize the full scale of what was taking place. At that moment, there was no known connection to Huber Heights, no indication that another death had already occurred, and no awareness that the suspect would soon be found dead miles away. The third crime scene emerged several hours later in West Milton, a small community north of Dayton. There, police located Jacob Pritchard's vehicle in a municipal parking lot. Officers found Pritchard dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. When they opened the trunk of the vehicle, they discovered the body of Jamie Pritchard. That discovery connected the 3 deaths and confirmed that the case involved multiple locations and movements over an extended period of time rather than a single contained incident. As investigators worked to reconstruct the sequence, officials emphasized what could be stated with confidence and what could not. They confirmed that all 3 individuals were connected professionally through Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, though they worked in different divisions. Gustitis served with the 711th Human Performance Wing, part of the Air Force Research Laboratory. Jamie Pritchard worked within the Air Force Life Cycle Management Center, and Jacob Pritchard was also employed within the broader research and support structure at the base. Authorities also stressed that none of the killings occurred on base property and that there was no ongoing threat to base personnel following the incident. By early 2026, investigators acknowledged that some aspects of the case might never be fully resolved. With the suspect deceased, there would be no trial, no sworn testimony, and no opportunity to challenge or clarify certain assumptions in court. While forensic evidence, digital records, and travel data helped narrow the timeline, officials were candid that the precise order of events, particularly when Jamie Pritchard's body was moved, remained unclear. The Air Force released statements mourning the loss of First Lieutenant Gustitis and Jamie Pritchard, describing them as valued members of the Wright-Patterson community. Support services and counseling resources were made available to employees affected by the deaths, many of whom struggled to reconcile the fact that colleagues they worked alongside were suddenly at the center of a violent investigation. Case 5. Marvin Pettaway and Marshawn Purley were both 18 years old when a late-night gathering in Toledo, Ohio, turned into one of the city's most serious murder cases of 2025. The case began in the early morning hours of November 2, 2025, after a party at the Weekend Restaurant and Lounge spilled out into the parking lot. What should have been the end of a social night instead became a scene of chaos. Gunfire erupted outside the club, leaving 19-year-old Jasmine Queen dead and 2 other people injured. By sunrise, Toledo police were investigating a homicide that would soon involve multiple defendants and some of the highest charges under Ohio law. According to investigators, the shooting happened shortly after the party ended, as groups of people were standing and talking outside the venue. Witnesses told police that an argument or confrontation took place, followed almost immediately by shots fired into the crowd. Jasmine Queen was struck and collapsed in the parking lot. Emergency responders arrived quickly, but she was pronounced dead at the scene. 2 additional victims were also hit by gunfire and rushed to a nearby hospital. Doctors later confirmed that both survived, though their injuries were serious and required medical treatment. The parking lot was secured as officers searched for shell casings, reviewed surveillance footage, and tried to determine who had opened fire. As the investigation unfolded, police learned more about the young woman at the center of the case. Jasmine Queen was 19 years old and worked at Doc Watson's, another well-known local restaurant. Friends and coworkers described her as hardworking and focused on her future. Her death sent shockwaves through Toledo's restaurant community and among other young people who recognized how quickly an ordinary night could turn deadly. Detectives soon identified Marvin Pettaway and Marshawn Purley as suspects. Both were 18 at the time of the shooting, which meant they would be charged as adults. Police relied on a combination of witness statements, physical evidence, and video footage from the area to build their case. Marvin Pettaway was arrested early, while Marshawn Purley was at large for several weeks. During that period, authorities asked for the public's help and expanded the search beyond the city. On December 31, 2025, the manhunt ended when Marshawn Purley was arrested by a U.S. Marshals Fugitive Task Force. With both primary suspects now in custody, prosecutors moved quickly. A Lucas County grand jury reviewed the evidence and returned sweeping indictments against Pettaway and Purley. Each was charged with aggravated murder, along with additional counts including attempted murder, felonious assault, and weapons violations. Prosecutors emphasized that 3 people had been shot and that the incident took place in a crowded area, increasing the danger to everyone present. The case expanded further when investigators announced charges against a third person, Brooklyn Cobian, who was 19 years old. Cobian was not accused of firing a weapon or taking part in the shooting itself. Instead, prosecutors indicted Cobian on obstruction of justice, alleging actions taken after the shooting that interfered with the investigation. The additional charge highlighted that the case was not only about what happened in the parking lot, but also about how people responded once police began looking for answers. As the defendants made their first appearances in court, attention turned to bond and scheduling. bond details became an important technical point in the case. Marvin Pettaway's initial municipal court bond was set lower, but once the case moved to the Lucas County Court of Common Pleas, his bond was raised to $2 million. That amount matched the $2 million bond set for Marshawn Purley in early January 2026, reflecting the seriousness of the aggravated murder charge. Both young men entered not guilty pleas, signaling that the case would move forward toward hearings and possibly trial rather than ending quickly. Court calendars for early 2026 began to take shape. Pre-trial hearings for Marvin Pettaway and Brooklyn Cobian are scheduled for January 21, 2026. These hearings are expected to address evidence issues, legal motions, and procedural matters that must be resolved before any trial can begin. Marshawn Purley's next court conference is scheduled for February 4, 2026, another key step in the ongoing legal process. Prosecutors and defense attorneys on all sides have indicated that the case will involve careful examination of witness testimony and forensic evidence. While the legal process moves forward, the impact of the shooting continues to be felt far beyond the courtroom. Jasmine Queen's death left her family grieving and a community searching for meaning. Vigils and messages of remembrance focused on her life, her work, and the future she never had the chance to reach. The two surviving victims, though less visible to the public, remain part of the case as living reminders of how close others came to losing their lives that night. Case 6. Thomas Overall. On the afternoon of May 14, 2025, a routine chore outside his home on Cleveland's west side turned fatal. It was still daylight on Munn Road, in the Cam's Corners area, when neighbors saw Overall mowing his lawn. There was nothing unusual about the moment. Cars passed, doors opened and closed. Life moved at its normal pace. Then gunfire broke the calm. Within seconds, Thomas Overall was down in his own yard, mortally wounded before anyone could intervene. Police arrived quickly and found Overall unresponsive. Paramedics pronounced him dead at the scene. Officers sealed off the street as detectives began interviewing neighbors and collecting evidence. What struck investigators immediately was the openness of the crime. This was not a hidden act or a late-night confrontation. It happened in full daylight, in a residential neighborhood, with no attempt to conceal the violence. Cleveland police soon stated that early evidence did not suggest a random shooting. As the investigation unfolded, detectives focused on the possibility that the shooter was someone Overall knew. Witness accounts and scene evidence pointed toward a targeted act rooted in a personal dispute. Authorities emphasized that there was no danger to the wider public, a statement that offered some reassurance, but also raised deeper questions about what could drive such violence in a familiar setting. Later that same day, police located a vehicle inside the Rocky River Reservation, a large wooded area not far from the shooting scene. Inside the car was 66-year-old Brian Hurt, who investigators identified as the suspected shooter. Hurt was found dead from what authorities described as an apparent self-inflicted gunshot wound. With evidence from both locations, police classified the case as a suspected murder-suicide, pending confirmation by the medical examiner. Neighbors soon began sharing accounts of long-standing tension involving Hurt. Several residents told local media outlets that disputes and confrontations had been ongoing for years. While police did not publicly outline a specific motive, they confirmed that the victim and the suspected shooter were known to each other. The violence, investigators said, appeared to be the final and tragic result of unresolved conflict rather than a spontaneous act. For the Munn Road community, the emotional toll was immediate. Residents described stepping outside to police tape and flashing lights in a place that had always felt safe. The abandoned lawnmower in the yard became a powerful symbol of how abruptly Thomas Overall's life ended. In the days that followed, flowers and notes appeared near the home. A memorial mass was later held, as family members and neighbors gathered to remember a man they described as quiet, private, and deeply rooted in his routine. As the primary investigation concluded, an unexpected development added another layer of gravity to the case. According to law enforcement sources, investigators later explored potential connections between Brian Hurt and an unsolved 2019 double homicide that occurred in the same Rocky River reservation, where Hurt was found dead. That earlier case involved two victims whose deaths had remained unresolved for years. Authorities clarified that this review did not mean charges could be filed, but it prompted detectives to re-examine past evidence, timelines, and any possible overlap. Police stressed that the inquiry into the 2019 case was exploratory rather than conclusive. With Hurt deceased, investigators could not question him or pursue new criminal proceedings. Still, the geographical connection raised significant interest among law enforcement, particularly given the rarity of violent deaths within the reservation. Officials acknowledged that the possibility of a link, even if never fully proven, underscored the importance of re-evaluating cold cases when new information emerges. Ultimately, the Thomas overall case closed without a courtroom trial or formal resolution beyond investigative findings. Case 7. Rodney Hinton Jr. was arrested on May 2, 2025, in Hamilton County, Ohio, and charged with aggravated murder. The charge stemmed from the death of Hamilton County Sheriff's Deputy Larry Henderson, who was struck by a motor vehicle and later died at University of Cincinnati Medical Center. At the time of the arrest, officials described the incident as a line-of-duty killing. As the months passed, court filings and public disclosures revealed a case shaped not by a single event, but by a chain of tragedies that unfolded within hours. Deputy Henderson was on duty when the fatal incident occurred. Prosecutors allege that Hinton was driving a Ford Focus when he crossed multiple lanes of traffic and struck the deputy. Emergency responders rushed Henderson to the hospital, but his injuries proved fatal. His death was formally classified as a line-of-duty death, triggering a homicide investigation and immediate statewide attention. Later that same day, Hinton was taken into custody and formally charged. From the beginning, prosecutors treated the case as intentional rather than accidental. The decision to pursue an aggravated murder charge reflected their claim that the act involved deliberate conduct directed at a law enforcement officer. Early court proceedings focused on physical evidence, traffic analysis, vehicle data, lane movement, and the point of impact. At that stage, however, one critical element was missing from public understanding: motive. That changed as the legal process advanced. Court records revealed that the deputy's death occurred approximately 2 hours after Rodney Hinton Jr. viewed body camera footage related to a separate and deeply personal tragedy. On the night before the deputy was killed, Hinton's 18-year-old son, Ryan Hinton, had been fatally shot by Cincinnati police officers during a law enforcement encounter. On the morning of May 2nd, Hinton was shown the footage of that shooting. Prosecutors later confirmed the timeline, stating that the deputy's death followed shortly after. The state has emphasized a crucial distinction. Prosecutors have repeatedly stated that Deputy Henderson had no involvement in the police shooting of Ryan Hinton. Instead, they allege that Hinton's actions were directed at law enforcement as a symbol, not at an individual connected to his son's death. This alleged motive, anger toward police as an institution, became central to the prosecution's theory of the case. According to prosecutors, Hinton intentionally accelerated his vehicle, flooring it across lanes of traffic to strike Deputy Henderson specifically because he was a uniformed officer. This claim forms the backbone of the aggravated murder charge. Defense attorneys have challenged that narrative, arguing that intent cannot be separated from Hinton's mental state at the time. Mental health became a defining issue in the case. In January 2026, the defense formally entered a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity, asserting that Hinton's mental condition prevented him from understanding or controlling his actions. Shortly afterward, on January 5, 2026, prosecutors announced they would no longer seek the death penalty. This decision followed evaluations by 3 mental health experts who concluded that Hinton suffers from bipolar disorder with psychosis. Under Ohio law, such a diagnosis renders a defendant ineligible for execution. Prosecutors made clear that withdrawing the death penalty did not mean withdrawing the murder charge. They stated that the case would proceed, but within the limits imposed by mental health findings and state law. The defense, meanwhile, argued that the diagnosis supported their claim that Hinton lacked criminal responsibility at the time of the incident. While awaiting trial, Hinton remained incarcerated. In December 2025, prosecutors filed an additional charge, alleging that Hinton assaulted a corrections officer at the Claremont County Jail. That charge is separate from the deputy's death, but added further legal exposure and complexity to the case. As the criminal proceedings continued, the case began to ripple outward into the public sphere in unexpected ways. In the days leading up to January 12, 2026, a public controversy erupted over a proposed settlement involving the city of Cincinnati and the family of Ryan Hinton, stemming from the police shooting that preceded Deputy Henderson's death. The Cincinnati Fraternal Order of Police publicly objected to the proposed settlement terms, while the city manager defended the city's position. The dispute unfolded through statements and public commentary, drawing renewed attention to the original police shooting and its unresolved civil consequences. Officials were careful to separate the civil settlement dispute from the criminal case involving Deputy Henderson's death. Nevertheless, the timing and visibility of the controversy underscored how deeply interconnected the events had become. What began as a criminal prosecution had expanded into a broader public reckoning involving police conduct, mental health, accountability, and institutional response. The criminal case itself was approaching a pivotal moment. A judge was scheduled to issue a formal ruling on January 14, 2026, determining whether Hinton's mental illness meets the legal standard required for an insanity defense under Ohio law. That ruling will shape how the case proceeds, including what evidence a jury may hear and how responsibility will be evaluated. Court officials also confirmed that, pending rulings and motions, Hinton's trial was tentatively scheduled for April 2026. No verdict has been reached. No final determination of guilt or innocence has been made. Prosecutors and defense attorneys continue preparing for trial, each side grounded in sharply different interpretations of the same sequence of events. Case 8. Deshaun Stafford was 24 years old when Akron police arrested him in October 2025, linking him to one of the most closely examined murder cases Ohio recorded that year. The arrest immediately drew attention because Stafford was already a familiar name in Summit County courts. Earlier, he had been convicted in the widely reported I Promise school assault case, an incident that placed him under public scrutiny long before the events that unfolded in Highland Square. This time, the charge was far more severe. Prosecutors accused Stafford of initiating a shooting that resulted in the death of Timothy Hutchinson, a 25-year-old man police say had no involvement in the dispute that led to gunfire. The shooting occurred in Highland Square, a neighborhood known across Akron for restaurants, music venues, apartments, and steady foot traffic. In October 2025, Akron police responded to reports of gunfire in the area. Officers arriving at the scene found Hutchinson suffering from gunshot wounds. Emergency responders attempted life-saving measures, but Hutchinson was pronounced dead at the scene. Streets were secured, shell casings were documented, and detectives began canvassing the area for witnesses and surveillance footage. The setting made the case especially unsettling, as the shooting occurred in a public space where many people were nearby. As investigators worked to reconstruct the incident, police developed what they described as a crossfire theory. According to Akron detectives, Hutchinson was not the intended target. Instead, he was an innocent bystander caught in the middle of a shootout between Deshaun Stafford and another man, Imani Thomas. Investigators stated that evidence indicated Stafford allegedly initiated the confrontation by firing first at Thomas. Police say Thomas returned fire, and one of those shots struck Hutchinson, killing him. Authorities emphasized that Hutchinson had no known connection to either man and was simply present in the area when the gunfire erupted. That investigative conclusion shaped how charges were filed. Prosecutors charged Stafford with murder, arguing that his alleged decision to open fire set the deadly sequence of events in motion. Thomas, by contrast, was charged with involuntary manslaughter, reflecting the state's position that while he did not intend to kill Hutchinson, his return fire directly caused the fatal injury. The case quickly became more complex, involving two defendants and a sequence of actions that unfolded within moments but carried permanent consequences. There was an important distinction in how each defendant entered custody. Stafford was arrested specifically in connection with the Highland Square shooting. Thomas, however, was already in custody at the time homicide charges were added. Court records show Thomas had been jailed earlier on unrelated aggravated robbery charges. It was only in late October 2025 that prosecutors formally added the involuntary manslaughter charge tied to Hutchinson's death. That procedural detail highlighted how the investigation continued to develop even after arrests on other matters had already been made. Stafford's arrest revealed additional issues beyond the shooting itself. Police reported that during his arrest, officers discovered a large quantity of narcotics. As a result, Stafford also faced additional charges related to drug trafficking and possession. Prosecutors clarified that these narcotics charges were separate from the homicide case, but would proceed through the court system alongside it. The discovery added another layer to the case, especially given Stafford's prior criminal history earlier in the year. That history weighed heavily on public reaction. Stafford's earlier conviction in the I Promise School assault case had already placed him at the center of statewide attention. That case involved a violent assault near the Akron school founded by LeBron James and resulted in a criminal conviction. Prosecutors repeatedly emphasized that prior convictions do not establish guilt in a new case, but they acknowledged that Stafford's record was part of the public court history and could be relevant in sentencing considerations if a conviction were to occur. Investigators continued strengthening the timeline of the Highland Square shooting. Detectives reviewed surveillance footage from nearby businesses, analyzed phone and location data, and conducted repeated interviews with witnesses who were present in the neighborhood that night. Authorities focused on mapping where Stafford and Thomas were positioned, how the exchange of gunfire began, and how Hutchinson came to be struck. Police declined to release detailed information about the firearms involved, stating only that Hutchinson's fatal injury resulted from gunfire during the confrontation. By late 2025, both defendants appeared in court. Stafford and Thomas each pleaded not guilty at their arraignments, formally pushing the case into the pretrial phase. Judges ordered the cases to proceed through the Summit County Court of Common Pleas, where motions, discovery, and evidentiary hearings would determine how the prosecution and defense present their arguments. Prosecutors stated they were prepared to argue that Stafford's alleged actions triggered the deadly encounter, while defense attorneys signaled plans to challenge the state's reconstruction of events and the crossfire theory itself. As of January 2026, both men remained in custody and continued to maintain not guilty pleas to all charges. Court records show that pretrial proceedings were actively moving forward. A pretrial hearing for Stafford was scheduled for February 4, 2026, marking a significant procedural step in the case. Thomas's case was advancing on a parallel track, addressing both the involuntary manslaughter charge connected to Hutchinson's death and the unrelated aggravated robbery charges that had already placed him behind bars. Case 9. Donnie Allen's name became tied to one of the most widely scrutinized murder cases Ohio saw in 2025. The case centers on the killing of Benjamin McComas, a 27-year-old man whose death occurred in a place meant for daily routine, not violence. On the evening of December 14, 2025, at approximately 7:30 p.m., Cleveland police were dispatched to the Puritas Rapid Transit Authority station, where gunfire had erupted in full view of commuters. By the time officers arrived, McComas was dead, and a case that would stretch into 2026 had already begun. Investigators determined that Benjamin McComas was shot during a confrontation that unfolded on the station platform. Witnesses later told police that the incident did not begin as a dispute between McComas and the suspect. According to those accounts, McComas intervened after seeing a woman being harassed and threatened. Multiple witnesses reported that McComas stepped between the woman and the suspect, attempting to de-escalate the situation. Moments later, gunfire broke out. McComas was struck and collapsed at the scene. Emergency responders attempted aid, but he was pronounced dead at the station. Police quickly identified Donnie Allen as the shooter. Allen was detained at or near the scene shortly after the shooting. Investigators stated that evidence, including surveillance footage, witness testimony, and forensic findings, linked Allen directly to the killing. As detectives continued their work, additional allegations surfaced about Allen's actions immediately after McComas was shot. According to police statements included in later court filings, Allen allegedly searched McComas's pockets after the shooting before law enforcement took him into custody. Prosecutors would later argue that this alleged conduct supported additional felony charges beyond homicide. The claim added another layer of gravity to the case, shifting it from a single act of violence to a sequence of actions that investigators said demonstrated criminal intent before and after the fatal shot. In the weeks that followed, the case moved steadily through the legal system. In late December 2025, a Cuyahoga County grand jury returned a multi-count indictment against Allen. While early reporting focused primarily on the murder charge, the final indictment was broader. Prosecutors charged Allen with aggravated murder, aggravated robbery, felonious assault, and having weapons under disability. Each charge carried significant penalties, and together they outlined what prosecutors described as a violent and unlawful course of conduct. The aggravated murder charge signaled that the state believed the killing met Ohio's highest threshold for criminal homicide. The aggravated robbery count was tied to the allegation that Allen searched the victim after the shooting. Felonious assault reflected the violent nature of the act itself, while the weapons under disability charge stemmed from Allen's prior criminal history, which legally prohibited him from possessing a firearm. At Allen's initial court appearances following the indictment, a judge set bond at $1 million. The amount reflected both the severity of the charges and concerns raised by prosecutors regarding public safety. Allen remained in custody as the case entered the pre-trial phase, where motions, evidence challenges, and witness lists would shape what a jury might eventually hear. As the legal process unfolded, public attention shifted to Allen's release history just days before the shooting. Court records confirmed that Allen had been released on bond 5 days earlier in an unrelated case involving offenses at another RTA station. That bond had been posted by the Bail Project, a nonprofit organization that assists defendants who cannot afford bail. In early 2026, new reporting added a critical detail to that timeline. Several outlets reported that members of Allen's own family had warned the Bail Project against securing his release. According to those accounts, relatives expressed concern that Allen was unstable and likely to reoffend if released. While those warnings did not carry legal authority, their existence intensified public scrutiny and fueled debate over how bail decisions are made and who bears responsibility when violence follows a release. City officials and community leaders responded by calling for reviews of bond practices and nonprofit involvement in bail posting. Legal experts emphasized that under Ohio law, bail decisions must be based on statutory criteria, not predictions or family concerns alone. Still, the McComas case became a reference point in broader conversations about risk assessment, judicial discretion, and the limits of preventive detention. Case 10. Murphy Tilk was 21 years old when a late 2025 shooting inside a Cincinnati pizza restaurant altered the lives of 2 families and placed Ohio's criminal justice system under a harsh spotlight. What initially appeared to be a straightforward workplace homicide evolved, by the end of December 2025, into a case marked by close personal ties, disputed intent, detailed forensic evidence, and unusual pretrial rulings. By January 2026, the matter remained unresolved, with the legal process still actively unfolding. The shooting occurred inside a Papa John's restaurant in Cincinnati's West Price Hill neighborhood. The victim, Nawaf Al-Thawadi, was 23 years old. Police confirmed that Al-Thawadi was shot during business hours and died at the scene. Officers quickly secured the building, evacuated employees, and began a detailed forensic examination of the interior. A location associated with routine orders and short interactions became the center of a homicide investigation within minutes. Court proceedings later clarified a crucial detail. At the time of the shooting, both Tilk and Al-Thawadi were inside the restaurant's bathroom. Investigators testified that the confined space played a key role in how quickly the incident unfolded. Witnesses reported hearing 2 gunshots within roughly 2 seconds. One bullet struck Al-Thawadi in the eye, causing a fatal injury. A second round was later recovered from the ceiling. The speed and proximity of the shots became central to how both sides framed their arguments. As the investigation progressed, the relationship between the 2 men emerged as one of the most significant elements of the case. Tilk and Al-Thawadi were not merely co-workers. According to statements presented in court, they were lifelong best friends who had attended high school together and later went on to college. Friends and family described a bond that extended well beyond the workplace, built over years of shared history. This revelation shifted public understanding of the case, reframing it as a deeply personal tragedy rather than a conflict between acquaintances. Tilk's defense team leaned heavily on that relationship as they outlined their position. They characterized the shooting as a tragic accident, asserting there was no intent to kill. In court, defense attorneys emphasized Tilk's background, noting that he was studying to become an oncologist, a detail offered to illustrate his plans and character. They argued that the incident was completely out of step with the life Tilk had been preparing for. The defense also addressed why Tilk was carrying a firearm at all. Attorneys stated that both men carried guns for protection during pizza deliveries, citing safety concerns tied to the restaurant's location on the 4,500 block of West 8th Street. According to court statements, that area had recorded 142 police visits in 2025 alone, which the defense described as evidence of elevated risk. They argued that Tilk carried the weapon because of those conditions, not with any plan to use it against his friend. Prosecutors, however, focused on responsibility rather than intent alone. Forensic testimony revealed that Al-Thawadi's firearm was found at the scene unloaded, a detail the state argued weakened claims of mutual threat or defensive readiness. Prosecutors contended that even if the shooting was not premeditated, the handling of a loaded firearm in a confined workplace bathroom met the standard for criminal liability. By mid-December 2025, Hamilton County prosecutors expanded the charges. In addition to murder, Tilk was also charged with reckless homicide. The additional count reflected the state's position that the evidence supported multiple legal theories, allowing a jury to weigh whether the shooting was intentional or the result of dangerous conduct. The dual charges underscored how much of the case would depend on expert testimony and juror interpretation. One of the most closely watched moments came during Tilk's bond hearing. In a decision that drew widespread attention, a judge set bond at $250,000 with 10% required, allowing for possible release while the case moved forward. The judge cited Tilk's lack of prior criminal history and substantial community support presented in court. However, the release conditions were strict. As of January 2026, the case remains ongoing, and Tilk was required to comply with electronic monitoring and lockdown conditions if released on bond, significantly limiting his movement while awaiting further court proceedings. Case 11. David Wayne Garner. Ohio authorities finally caught up with him on March 24, 2025, ending a weeks-long search tied to the aggravated murder of Rashawn Brinkley. The arrest closed a case that began quietly but carried enormous weight. Investigators say Brinkley was killed in a targeted shooting, and the path to Garner's arrest would involve detailed vehicle tracking, a fugitive task force, and a moment that became historic for law enforcement in northern Ohio. The crime itself occurred earlier on January 20, 2025, on the 1700 block of Shaw Avenue in East Cleveland. Police say Rashawn Brinkley was sitting inside his 2004 Chevy Malibu when he was shot. Investigators later confirmed he was struck twice in the head while still in the driver's seat. Officers arriving at the scene found no signs of a random shootout. Instead, the evidence pointed to a focused and deliberate killing that happened quickly and left Brinkley dead at the scene. As detectives began working the case, attention turned to another vehicle seen in the area. Investigators identified the suspect's vehicle as a black 2019 Dodge Ram 1500 pickup truck. Surveillance footage, witness accounts, and vehicle information helped narrow the timeline and movements tied to the shooting. Those details became crucial, separating the victim's final moments in Malibu from the actions of the person police believed was responsible. David Wayne Garner soon emerged as the primary suspect. Authorities say the evidence connected him to both the Dodge Ram and the shooting itself. Once an arrest warrant was issued, however, Garner was nowhere to be found. What followed was a manhunt that stretched across northeast Ohio. The urgency was heightened by Garner's background. Beyond the aggravated murder charge, law enforcement confirmed he had an extensive criminal history dating back to 2002. At the time of the search, Garner was also already wanted on a separate domestic violence warrant, making him a priority target for arrest. Because of the seriousness of the case, the search was taken over by the Northern Ohio Violent Fugitive Task Force, a multi-agency unit led by the U.S. Marshals Service. Investigators followed leads, checked known locations, and monitored possible movements tied to Garner. Each day without an arrest added pressure, especially for Brinkley's family, who were waiting for answers. The search ended on March 24, 2025, but even that detail required clarification. Some early reports suggested Garner was found inside an apartment. Later reporting confirmed a more precise account. Garner was apprehended during a traffic stop near the 2200 block of Brockway in Cleveland Heights. Authorities said the arrest happened without incident. There was no chase and no resistance. After weeks on the run, Garner was taken into custody and transferred to face the aggravated murder charge. That arrest carried significance beyond this single case. Law enforcement confirmed that Garner's capture marked the 60,000th arrest made by the Northern Ohio Violent Fugitive Task Force since its creation in 2003. For the task force, it was a milestone reflecting more than 2 decades of tracking violent offenders across the region. For this case, it marked the moment the investigation shifted fully from pursuit to prosecution. After his arrest, Garner was formally charged with aggravated murder in connection with Rashawn Brinkley's death. The charge reflects prosecutors' belief that the killing met specific legal standards involving intent and circumstances. Given Garner's criminal history and the nature of the allegations, the case carries the possibility of severe penalties if a conviction is secured. Case 12. Quandrick Morris Oglesby. A late-night dispute inside a Dayton lounge turned into one of Ohio's most serious murder prosecutions of 2025. The violence unfolded in the early morning hours of April 5, 2025, inside Sugar's Lounge on North Main Street, a place where patrons had gathered for drinks, conversation, and a dice game that would soon turn fatal. According to investigators, the confrontation began during the dice game. Witnesses later told police that disagreements escalated quickly, with raised voices and mounting tension inside the bar. Surveillance footage reviewed by detectives reportedly captured the moments leading up to the shooting. Prosecutors allege that Morris Oglesby pulled out a firearm during the argument and opened fire inside the lounge. Panic followed instantly. Patrons ran for safety as gunshots echoed through the room. When the chaos stopped, Keeson Webb had been struck and was lying wounded inside the bar. Emergency responders were called, but Webb did not survive his injuries. Police secured Sugar's Lounge, collecting shell casings, reviewing security footage, and interviewing everyone who had been inside at the time. Investigators quickly determined the shooting was not random. Evidence pointed to a dispute tied directly to the dice game, shifting the case toward a targeted act rooted in a personal conflict rather than a spontaneous attack on strangers. What happened next added another layer to the case. Beyond the shooting itself, investigators allege Morris Oglesby took steps to interfere with evidence before fleeing. According to court records, surveillance footage showed him stealing a ballistic vest and the bar's security DVR system from the scene. Prosecutors say that move appeared designed to remove key evidence that could document what happened inside the lounge. By the time police identified him as the primary suspect, Morris Oglesby was already gone. Authorities later determined that after leaving Sugar's Lounge, Morris Oglesby fled to a friend's house in Middletown, Ohio. His vehicle was eventually recovered there by police, confirming the direction of his escape. As days passed without an arrest, law enforcement agencies intensified their search. The case gained regional attention when the FBI announced a reward of up to $15,000 for information leading to his capture, signaling both the seriousness of the charges and the urgency of locating him. Eventually, Morris Oglesby turned himself in to authorities. While his surrender marked a major break in the case, it did not end the investigation. Detectives continued reviewing surveillance footage, witness testimony, forensic evidence, and the alleged actions taken after the shooting. Their findings would significantly expand the scope of the charges he faced. In November 2025, a Montgomery County grand jury returned a sweeping indictment. Quandrick Morris Oglesby was formally charged with 4 counts of murder, not 2, reflecting multiple legal theories connected to Webb's death. In addition to the murder charges, prosecutors indicted him on 2 counts of aggravated robbery, 2 counts of felonious assault, and 1 count of tampering with evidence. The expanded charges underscored prosecutors' belief that the case involved not only a fatal shooting, but deliberate actions taken before and after to facilitate escape and obstruct the investigation. Case 13. Gregory Tillman's case moved firmly into Ohio's criminal court system. In December 2025, a Summit County grand jury returned an indictment charging Tillman with the murder of his girlfriend, 44-year-old Rebecca Lee Guthrie, and with additional felony counts connected to the shooting of her 25-year-old son, who survived. The indictment marked a turning point in a case that began as a domestic dispute and ended with 1 life lost and another permanently changed. Police reports show that the violence unfolded inside a residential setting in Akron, Ohio. According to investigators, the incident began during an argument between Tillman and Guthrie. Authorities have not publicly released details about the subject of that argument, but they have confirmed that it escalated rapidly. During the confrontation, Guthrie was stabbed and shot, suffering fatal injuries. She was pronounced dead at the scene. Guthrie's 25-year-old son was also shot during the incident. Police stated that he was injured while attempting to intervene. Emergency responders transported him for medical treatment, and he survived. His survival expanded the scope of the case, transforming it from a single homicide into a multi-victim prosecution involving additional violent felony charges. Tillman was taken into custody shortly after the incident. Detectives conducted interviews, processed the scene, and gathered physical and forensic evidence. The case was presented to a Summit County grand jury, which is tasked with determining whether probable cause exists to move forward with felony charges. In late December 2025, the grand jury returned a multi-count indictment. The charges included murder for the death of Rebecca Lee Guthrie. Tillman was also indicted on felonious assault or attempted murder related to the shooting of Guthrie's son. In addition, the grand jury charged Tillman with having weapons while under disability, a felony under Ohio law. Court records show that the weapons under disability charge is based on Tillman's criminal history, which dates back approximately 20 years. That history includes prior weapons and drug convictions, which legally barred him from possessing a firearm at the time of the incident. Prosecutors allege that despite this prohibition, Tillman had access to and used a firearm during the attack. This charge carries its own penalties and will be addressed separately in court alongside the murder and assault counts. Following the indictment, Tillman entered the formal court process. In early December 2025, he entered a plea of not guilty to the charges. As of early 2026, the case remains in the pretrial phase, with hearings focused on procedural matters rather than verdicts. No trial has yet occurred, and no final rulings have been issued on guilt or innocence. Prosecutors have been careful in their public statements. While police reports confirm that the violence began during an argument, no official motive has been announced. Authorities have not speculated publicly about intent beyond what is required to support the charges. This restraint reflects standard practice in serious felony cases, where details are often reserved for presentation in court. The indictment itself represents a legal threshold, not a conclusion. It signals that prosecutors believe sufficient evidence exists to proceed to trial. The burden of proof remains with the state, and the defense is entitled to challenge every element of the case. Judges overseeing the proceedings have emphasized due process and adherence to Ohio law. I hope you found this video interesting. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe to my channel.